Check, check. Oh, it works. Great. I guess, yeah. All right. Microphone still works. Okay, so hello, my name is Maxi, and I'll let you come back in. Okay, yeah. Well, I guess this can be our nice introduction. We're waiting for them to come back. So how are you all doing today? Cool. Any of you into queer advocacy at all? Okay, cool. And what ways does it show up in your lives? Okay, cool, cool. Okay, cool. I do love MTOG. Hello. Welcome. I wonder how long they're going to take in the bathroom. I'll just start, because it might take a long time. So my name is Maxi Glamour, and I kind of put together this presentation on decolonizing queer advocacy in Black communities. Over the last, I don't know, my whole life being a queer person, I've been thinking about how can we free ourselves, how can we free the community. I recently went to the United Nations and Switzerland, and I studied international queer discursive strategies, looking at particularly African and Arab communities and how colonialism had a huge impact on the way that homophobia shows up in Black and brown communities globally. So I want to start off with me, who is Maxi Glamour. I am an anti-fascist fairy creature studying philosophy, making music, and breaking gender norms with wit, whimsy, and wonder. Here's a little bit more like real stuff about me. I'm a philosopher. My focus is on queer theory, philosophy of language, ecofeminism, continental philosophy, philosophy of race, post-colonial critical theory. I'm the first drag performer from St. Louis on international television. I was appointed as commissioner for the Civil Rights Enforcement Agency by former Mayor Tashara Jones. I'm the first non-binary elected committee person for the city of St. Louis, and I'm the president and the co-founder of Trans Housing Initiative St. Louis, also known as THISTL, and we do qualitative research analyzing the intersections of trans people within the housing sector and ensuring that they can go from being unhoused to owning houses. And we've had some people be unhoused to actually buy their own house, and so it's a successful program, and I'm really happy to be a part. Now, I think we should just start off with the premise that if you argue with this premise, it might not be the presentation for you. But queer people are under attack, right? In 2025, there have been 969 anti-trans bills that have been introduced in the country. 969. Of them, 121 have passed. But 644 have failed, which is kind of good, but still kind of bad. But 204 are currently active, which is really great. Usually, Missouri is the highest in the anti-trans bills. We are the second highest this year, so everyone give yourselves a round of applause. Texas has beat us for the most homophobic state in the country. As we could see, that homophobia isn't something that is just isolated within the legislative body. Discrimination happens as early as kindergarten. And this chart kind of looks at discrimination in schools, specifically on LGBT issues. So 90% of LGBT students hear anti-queer comments in school. 90%, right? 84% of LGBT youth report verbal harassment at school because of their gender identity and or sexual orientation. 55% of transgender youth report physical attacks. This means physical attacks on kids for just being queer or being transgender. And that doesn't stop at school. We grow up, we go to work, and discrimination happens there. 58% of queer employees engage in covering behaviors. This is hiding their attire, avoiding pronouns, altering appearance, discursive ways that they talk, to avoid mistreatment. 72% of LGBTQ workers have heard anti-queer comments or jokes at work. 34% of queer employees have left a job due to unfair treatment due to their queerness. And so we can see that these problems within institutions correlate to higher suicide rate of queer people. This chart over on the left shows heterosexual people and the attempted suicide rates. On the right, this is LGBT children and teens, which is 4 times as likely. So as we can see, these policies and this discourse is literally killing queer people. and they are part of a colonial history. And so this is the part where I really want to talk to you about colonizing and demoralizing, and how the colonial legacy of European conquest led to homophobia in Africa and Black communities globally. So we have to start by recognizing that queerness is not a Western construct, and it has existed in many cultures pre-colonization. This is an image of Zinga of Ndongo Omatamba from 1583 to 1663. She defied Portuguese colonization. She challenged gender norms by taking on male roles and women partners, and stands as a symbol of African pre-colonial queer and feminist resistance. This is an illustration of her. In 1622, she entered a strategic alliance with Portugal, which was beneficial for her at the time. The Portuguese tried to go around her with slave trades and other trading things, and she decided she wanted to team up with the Dutch to create a way that they could get the most power for people in Angola. She won, and she continued to fight vigilantly until she was in her 60s. She went by King. She took the name King in her title for herself in African countries, in African language. I don't really know what the word was, but she called herself a king. She had women partners, and she also had men concubines that dressed up as women, which was really cool. I love drag queens. And we can really see that queerness is really quite common in Africa. This is an anthropological text about sexual behaviors in Africa pre-colonization. This was written by a German man in 1923. I'm going to read it for you. It's kind of erotic. I have found homosexual intercourse from Orange, South Africa, northward up to the Congo. Natives have indicated to me that it is generally widespread among South African natives. When it comes to same-sex love, the Wawihe, dwellers of the high plateau of the Benguela, one can see clearly distinguish between same-sex love on a bisexual basis from that due to homosexuality. Homosexuals, called omotuta, who actively or passively practice puricatio, or anal intercourse, are sneered at and punished, so they hide themselves. Okulinga, omotuta, is a verb form. On the other hand, hand digitatio, that is mutual masturbation, is widely practiced by heterosexuals as well as homosexuals. The pertinent word is okilukaweka, and designates male and male as well as female and female intercourse. The same text states, in any case, however, it is quite clear that same-sex love, repeat, same-sex love and intercourse are an integral component of the sex life of both African tribes mentioned. Homosexuality or pseudo-homosexuality definitely belongs to the sex life of other tribes as well. And so I really wanted to show that was the 1600s where they were talking about, actually 1800s. 1600 was Nzinga. This is a cartouche of ancient Egypt. These two were manicurists for the pharaohs. This is Nyankhnum and Khnumhotep, and their queer love was thousands of years before Aristotle and Plato, circa 2400 BCE. And so if you can see this image right here, their noses are together and they are in warm embrace. So usually in ancient Egyptian art, this represents love. This represents how a man and a woman would be together. You can see if you further analyze this is actually their family. So there's a lot of speculation between the relationship between these two, even though they are, with their noses touching, this represents kissing in ancient Egyptian culture. They have children on the side, and so there was a DNA test done on them to see maybe they're brothers, maybe they're conjoined twins. It shows that they're actually half-brothers, and if you keep looking into ancient Egyptian sexual relationships, incest was very common, especially incest that was homosexual. And ancestral homosexuality was very common in pre-colonial Africa, many different countries. But when we're looking at African culture and African relationship to sexuality, each tribe had different religions. Each religion had different relationships with sex. So when we're looking at Africa as a whole, there might have been places that homosexuality was completely legal. There could be places where they had gods and goddesses that were trans as fuck, and they loved them. I wanted to also highlight that homosexuality and queerness was also all around the world. We had the Hydra in South Asia. We have Two-Spirit people in North America, even though this term came around in the 90s. We had the Fa'afine from Samoa. We had Obatala, which was a West African god. We have the Mukhanathon from the Middle East, and the Bisu from India. So we had all this beautiful gay sex, everyone was trans, we had lesbian kings, it was great until colonialism brought new rules on gender. So we've seen with historical context around legislation, there was a lot of laws that have been put in place previously that made homosexuality illegal, right? There were laws that happened. But in 1533, the first anti-sodomy law was put into civil courts that was taking it out of religious spaces. So previously it was God said you can't have gay sex. He doesn't like it because he can't, because he's just a spirit. That's a whole other conversation. Then this man and his group, they were like, hey, the church and I, we're not really getting along. Let's take some of the laws and make them civil as opposed to just religious. So in 1533, the Buggery Act in England was put into place, which was allegedly the first secular anti-sodomy law in the world. And then in 1810, there was really interesting penal codes that were happening in France, right? They legalized homosexuality. They were like, do whatever you want. It's very okay. We like it over here. I'm actually fluent in French, so that was my my really bad accent. So this penal code in 1810, it decriminalized private sex relationships between homosexuals, but public expressions of queerness were still criminalized due to previous indecency laws. And then we can see in 1861, going from France to England, Section 377, a British colonial law, criminalized unnatural sex acts, which was used to target oral, anal, and same-sex relationships. And these laws continued, right? So this La Bouchère Amendment criminalized gross indecency, broadly used to prosecute male homosexuality when sodomy could not be proven. This was put in place in 1885. This same law is this guy. Yes, Oscar Wilde. He was convicted of these laws from the La Bouchère Amendment. Does this work? Oh, it does. You can't turn it. You can't tilt it. Oh, the mic. Okay. So let's go to this code, right? La Code de l'Ingénieur criminalized immorality in francophone colonies, enforcing assimilation by punishing gender nonconformity and indigenous spiritual roles with forced labor, imprisonment, and corporal punishment, often targeting queerness. So basically, if you were queer in a colonized part of a francophone country, they would beat you, they would force you to go in jail and make you assimilate. Sounds fun. These laws, when we look at colonialism didn't stop in the 1900s. It continued. France was complicit in colonialism until some parts of 1965. They're still colonized today. So the Vichy regime in France raised the age of consent for same-sex acts for 21, but it kept it at 13 for heterosexual acts, which is really interesting. If you're 13 years old, you can have sex that's straight, but you can't have gay sex. This law didn't just stay in France, because during the 40s, France was colonizing half of the world still. So these policies were implemented in Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean. Then we came to the land of the free, the United States. So in 1873, the Comstock Act happened, and this banned the mailing of obscene materials, including LGBT literature. This was used to censor queer art, zines, and education in the 20th century. And then we had the Lavender Scare of 1953, which was an executive order 10/4500, which banned individuals from working in the federal government. And then we had the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy, which happened in 1993, which banned openly queer people from serving in the military. And so we see all these things, but we really don't talk about slavery. Slavery was a really important part when we're talking about homophobia, especially within Black communities, right? This is an image which is really powerful, not just because they are an enslaved African person, but it says, am I not a man and a brother? Really, one of the things that came out of slavery was the drive for masculinity to be properly validated, because through slavery, Black men in particular were used as horses, used as beasts of burden to do labor for white people, and they were dehumanized. They had no humanity, so their manhood was stripped, their brotherhood was taken away, and slavery created a psychological causal implication where black men needed to feel as though that they were valid in this white supremacist world. And that was some of the biggest bases of homophobia within black communities. So these are some of the things that were causally linked between homophobia and slavery, in particular around masculinity. So as black families fought for civil rights and social mobility, many internalized conservative family values to prove their worth in a white society. And this kind of aligns with respectability politics. We can see respectability politics kind of shows up in tandem with hypermasculinity as a form of resistance. So after centuries of emasculization, sexual violence by white enslavers, black communities replicated patriarchal harms as a way to reclaim power, structure, and dignity. And so within this, we can see that the respectability politics is the force to be respectable in a white supremacist world, and a reliance on these gender constructs that are erasing us from our history. We're hyper masculine, we're trying to be respectable because we are constantly being surveyed. So the queer expressions among black people were criminalized more harshly than their white counterparts due to racism. So post-emancipation, queer black folks, they face dual policing. They face the policing of their communities, of their families, and additionally from the white folk on the outside. And so we are seeing this, and then we have years of Jim Crow, we have still constant segregation, and then we have a lack of intergenerational healing. The trauma of slavery disrupted family structures, community transmission of cultural memory, and emotional vulnerability, then leaving little space to affirm diverse sexualities and gender. And that's where we're at today. So we're stuck with this lie that queerness isn't black, but we can see the evidence that queerness happens before whiteness. But we have always been here. So we're looking at the access of education, and this has a huge, huge impact on queer acceptance within black communities, right? We're in a university right now, and I can tell you, as studying philosophy here, there's not a lot of black people in a lot of these classes. Sometimes I'm the only black person in the class trying to have a conversation about blackness with white people. This is by design. This is a systematic structure of white people trying to take education from black people to ensure that we cannot be free. This did not just start in the 50s, but it had a huge impact. The impact, as we can see, the national average 6-year graduation rates. We have Asian people at the top, non-residents, white, all students, 2 or more races, Hispanic, Native, Indigenous, and at the end, we have black. Latin and black people are always at the bottom of people who are performing at an institutional college level. It is because of centuries of them trying to get us out. And then so when we have queer theory is brought to you through academia. We have people such as Judith Butler, who is an amazing philosopher, whose work on the surveillance of gender is outstanding, but it was not made for black people. It was written for white people in academic settings, and so we have queer theorists going into black communities, quoting Judith Butler's Panopticon off of Foucault, and they're like, what the fuck are you talking about? This is just an image I thought was funny. Queer advocacy often looks like this. You know, I often show up in these places. We have the I'm gay, white, and racist man. I just found that image on the internet, and I was like, this is exactly what I want. And this is just an image of a circuit party. They're all white men. This is a normal party in queer. And go to Just John's, that's probably what you will see. And I'm sorry that it is not just gendered. There are many people. I wanted to put queer people with, asymmetrical haircuts and green hair, because I think that there is a trope that this is what queerness is. These are the people that often go into communities and say, hey, we want to fight for queer rights. Come on, we're going to go to North City and save you poor black queer people from the oppression of your families. White gays will not be the saviors of black queer people. period. That's just that. You can show up as allies, and I think that hopefully this helps with an analysis around that. So when we're looking at advocacy, we have to recognize that advocacy is more than words. It is powerful discourse that demands change. And so I took this chart. This chart was made for blackness, and I wanted to take it, and how can we take blackness and queerness and align them together? So this is going from an actor to an accomplice. Accomplice is the end goal when we're looking for advocacy work. Actors, sometimes it's just pseudo-intellectualism. It's maintaining the status quo. It's avoiding disrupting cis-heteronormative systems. It's silent when people get misgendered. Attends pride events but avoids actual advocacy, maybe going to a pride parade and taking a picture of Wesley Bell. That could be, something that an actor would do. And so actions that people in this role can take really reflect on your privilege. Not just your white privilege or your gendered privilege, but all aspects of privilege, right? Your socioeconomic status, your ability to read, ability to write, ability to wipe your own ass in the morning. And then when we're doing that, we need to also look and see how we can share and follow posts by queer advocates. That's the ally, the actor. A lot of times we talk about allyship. We have an ally flag for the queer allies. If you fly that, I will make fun of you. Why do you need to promote that you're an ally? You should just be one. So allies disrupt queerphobia through everyday actions and education. They use correct names and pronouns. They attempt to disrupt biases and educate peers respectfully. Things that they can do: normalize pronoun sharing in your emails, support inclusive policies, and learn queer history. That sounds great, but we need you to do more, right? We literally have a white supremacist fascist government trying to erase queer people from public existence. They literally introduce bills to make trans people illegal in public spaces. So we need to do more than just say, I'm an ally, I have my ally flag. I need to do something actually more. So we need to get accomplices. So the road from actor to accomplice might be really difficult. With the accomplices, we need to act in solidarity, Accomplices act in solidarity to dismantle systems. They take risks. That's the most important part. They take risks for collective liberation. They challenge anti-trans laws. They follow queer, BIPOC leadership. They redistribute power and resources. This is really, really important because queer people can't be liberated if we're still poor. Things that they can take: testify. There are always spaces for people to testify in the Capitol. I can tell you who is not testifying quite frequently: black people. Black people talking about queer rights. Often there are not very many people at the state Capitol doing that. We need people to protest. Black people know how to protest. We just got that. We got that going. Organizing canvas. We also need to fund queer-led work. You said you work with Promo. Promo is a great organization to fund here in the area. Also THISTL and Squish and MTUG, not Pride. Anyways. Speaking of pride, I think one thing about accomplices is that we really need to hold institutions accountable. There are a lot of institutions that are trying to pinkwash their human rights violations, a lot of institutions that are going to use queerness to promote their anti-blackness. HRC has been quite complicit of anti-trans rhetoric, anti-black rhetoric. The fact that they supported Cuomo over Cynthia Nixon is a huge thing that I will never forgive them for. But we really need to recognize that being an actor, saying you're an ally, doesn't really mean anything unless you are trying and willing to move mountains and put some sweat into the game. So when we're looking at advocacy, a good advocate needs to be a good communicator, because changing policy systems has to start with changing minds. So I really wanted to highlight the power of storytelling when we're looking at advocacy discourse and work. So a lot of people think that advocacy and fighting for human rights is just something social. There is no neurological components about it. But our brains are the biggest muscle when it comes to information acquisition. And so when we're having conversations with our hotep uncle, our crooked sister, our wild child, we need to ensure that the information is properly getting acquired so that we can communicate and that they can self-actualize so the information can be processed. So brains on data, they do not connect with all parts of the brain. I can read a science book. I'm not going to understand all of it. All of it isn't going to be retained. Brains on stories is a different situation, right? So when we're looking at brains on stories versus brains on data, the brains on data, we have the language processing part of the brain getting lit up. Neuroconnectivity and the neuroelectrons are going there. It's lit up. We're seeing a lot of brain activity there and language comprehension. But when you're sharing and listening to stories, we can understand that when we're thinking about the sense, we have the language processing already going, we have the language comprehension going, but then we have the shapes, and then we have other parts of language comprehension where we're trying to respond, and then we have the sounds, and we have movement, we have our imagination. So looking at this, the brain, while you are having a conversation that is a story, you are releasing more chemicals. These chemicals being released in your brain help you process information. When we're thinking about advocacy discourse, what good is it to bring all these charts to your hotep uncle who has all the transphobic and misogynistic slurs if you're fighting a brick wall, right? Sometimes these facts and information no one gives a fuck about, right? But they care about their cousin that came out as trans, or they care about their mom who has healthcare problems, who couldn't get a heart transplant because her insurance flaps. It lapsed and it lapsed again because Medicaid is getting decreased in funding. So if you can connect on those components, right, it is not so hard to look at the healthcare industry and say, oh, well, trans people are facing a similar thing. They can't get the dire care that they need. And so when we're looking at this, when we're telling stories and having them share stories too, because conversation isn't just about talking at people, it's about talking with people, even though I'm talking at you right now. We really need to get the brain activated, because if you do not activate the brain, the information is not going to be properly processed there, right? Smells are associated with memory. You've ever walked past someone and they smell good and you thought about them for a second? That's because your brain is releasing chemicals in that part. And then you associate that good feeling with that good person. And so when we're thinking about advocacy within Black communities and all communities in general, we need to move beyond paternalism and towards compassionate understanding. A lot of advocacy with people, we know it. We have the information. I've read the data. I've studied internationally. I know a lot about trans rights. But me talking down to someone and telling them they're culturally inferior, telling them that they're stupid and they're backwards and they just don't know better, mocking the way that they speak, is not going to get anywhere. So we need to move intentionally beyond paternalism and towards compassionate understanding. A lot of my research is looking at fascism in the 40s and 50s in Germany. And how do they analyze the rise of fascism, and how do we need to combat that? There are parallels about what was going on in Germany in the 40s with those Nazis to these orange Nazis that we got here today. And so this is one of my heroes. His name is Jürgen Habermas. I do a lot of research on him. And so one of his main components was communicative rationality. How do we rationalize communication between two individuals? And how do we ensure that there are ethical standards between discourse? So we created a thing called the theory of communicative rationality. How can we rationalize communication in a non-coercive manner to ensure that people who are entering conversation, the conversation is mutually intelligible, right? So that mutual intelligibility, wow, this really did skew the wrong size. That mutual intelligibility really is combating authoritarian discursive methods, right? We see that top-down thing of just be good, just do this, but you need that self-actualization. People need to understand, why do I need to be good? What is the word good? And what are the consequences if I am bad? So we really need to critically examine inherited narratives and create space for subjugated knowledges. So the knowledges that have been erased, the knowledge of ancestral gay, sex, Black history that has been intentionally erased needs to be brought back up. You know, the fact that colonial legacies have erased queerness from Black communities, that needs to be talked about. So communication must be built upon shared epistemological frameworks to ensure that there is mutual intelligibility. And I think about epistemology, right, as a brick. When we're thinking about bricks, these bricks build houses. They build buildings. So we have a building. That's a whole claim or a fact. But that fact is built on a whole bunch of other small little bricks. So when we're having conversation, we sometimes need to go to the smallest brick to ensure that we have mutual intelligibility. And so doing that, we need to justify actions and policies in a way that can be mutually understood, not assumed. This means prioritizing Black queer leadership and conversations about queer justice, and practice listening as an ethical act more than just a political performance. And I think I had a couple more slides. Let me just... I was doing them before y'all got here because, you know, I got lost in research and I found like 50 books about gay sex in Africa from the 1600s. And it was as interesting as you would think. Okay. So one of the components that really gets talked about recently is queer theory. Queer theory is a Black adaptation of queer theory. It's really trying to use Southern Ebonics to talk about queerness in a Black message. So queer theory was popularized in 2001 by Patrick Johnson. Queer theory is a subversive adaptation of queer theory that critically considers the intersection of race, ethnicity, class, gender, desire, and sexuality. Queer theory challenges the binary system that limit the fluidity of gender and sexuality, specifically considers the construct of racialized sexuality, which is often absent in strands of queer theory. And so I just wanted to add a little bit, some more text for you to read, because I did talk about a whole bunch of white people. I don't think white people are always going to be the answer for Black liberation, so I wanted to show you some African authors that talk about queer sex, because we are more than just a gaze of whiteness. We are a Blackness of history. So this book is really great. It's Decolonization and Afrofeminism by Sylvia Tamale. This one is Male Daughters and Female Husbands, Gender and Sex in African Society by Ifa Amadume. The Invention of Women by Oyonke Oyewumi. And then this one is one of my favorite books of all time. This is Decolonizing the Mind by Ngugi wa Thiong'o. And it really, this book doesn't really talk about sexuality, but it talks about colonization and discourse. When we're talking about the history of Blackness, we're talking about the history of queerness, how come it is in the language of the oppressor? How can we talk about the history of Blackness from a white perspective? So Ngugi wa Thiong'o really wanted to look at Marxism, really wanted to look at these cultural analyzers and the cultural social theorists. How did they talk about Africa, and how did their perception about Africa get instituted in the way that African people talk about themselves? Not only just because the texts are written in the language of the oppressor, but the concepts about oneself was written in the language of the oppressor. The concept Africa itself was a word not made by Africans. And so when we're thinking about decolonization, we need to understand that decolonizing, the word decolonizing itself is a word created by white people. And so I just wanted to also put, this is a recent research project that I did on the salt of neurodivergent Black boyhood, how colonial legacies show up in the education system, and the vilification of Black boys needs specific attention, so that when we are advocating for justice within Black communities, we can combat that toxic masculinity by understanding that many people in Black communities, we are neurodiverse, right? When we're looking at the data, Black people don't get tested for autism as frequently as white people. White people from middle class communities, they're like, I want to get my kid tested for everything. Black people are like, I'm not going to pay for that unless I see a problem. And so that problem is usually nonverbal autism. And so autistic people are in Black communities at rates that we don't even know, because we don't get tested, because we have a history of Black people being forced into disabilities, being forced into classes, being told that we don't have the neural complexity for information comprehension, so we are quote unquote special needs. And so Black people don't get tested. And so when we're having conversations, about advocacy discourse within Black communities, we have to recognize sometimes our aunties are autistic and nobody even knows. So the language acquisition needs to understand that it is not just a sociological problem, it is a biological, psychological problem that gets ignored. And so we need to connect with the neuroconnectivity of their brain to make sure that information gets processed. Because autism and neurodiversity isn't just people who can't function. People function in a capitalist society with neurodiversity masking every single day. And so when we are advocating for Black liberation, queer liberation in Black communities, we to understand that these intersections are there. So go read that on my website if you like. Now it's question time. The thing is that there are Black people that are testifying in Jefferson City. The Crown Act that just got passed that made it illegal to discriminate based off of hair, especially Black hair. There were a lot of Black people who showed up. When it came to queer rights, there were not a lot of Black people who showed up for that. I don't know how to get that data, because when they have you testify and fill out a form, they don't ask you your race. And so I don't know how to see that. I could reach out to other people, but yeah, you got me, I don't know. Yeah, I think that definitely would be helpful. I think really like looking at states like Arkansas, Alabama, states that are like really red that have some blue cities. Because I think the thing about our state is that Black people don't really live in Jefferson City. There might be a few of them out there, but not really. And so for us to come from St. Louis, from Kansas City, that's a long drive. That's a few hours. And so I think analyzing other states that have the similar like red state, the capital is far away from actual urban areas. I think analyzing how they can be successful is really, really necessary in figuring that out. Yeah. Any more questions? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just did a program with Promo on data collecting. I think the thing is that a lot of these organizations, they don't have a lot of funding. And there's also the nonprofit industrial complex, right, where we have to ensure that the executive director and their 7 full-time staff get properly funded, but some of these projects don't get funded. And so I think that we're also, for that data to be there, we have to do a qualitative analysis of Missouri versus another city or another state, right? To see like who is showing up where. And I feel like they're not, interstate data on that is really hard to do, because who is the data pool? How are you going to ensure that people show up? I don't know. I think I'm just rambling on that, but I think that there's, all in all, I don't think that we have organizations that have the full capacity to actually do that here, and we can keep pushing them. But I think that the state boundaries, because when it comes to queer legislation and the Supreme Court, they're trying to put it to states. And so we are the test state. People come to Missouri to test horrible policies, they see if we can get it passed here, then we can get it passed another state. So they try Missouri, and then they go to Texas, and they get it passed in Texas, and then they bring it to the Supreme Court. I feel like comparing states is necessary, but it's also comparing apples to oranges, because there's not the same like geographical makeup, racial makeup, or political makeup. We can look at similarities and differences, but I feel like any organization doesn't have the capacity to actually do that. If they did, I would love to work for them. Hire me. Somebody. More questions? Easier questions? I think that one is actually easier. I think what we're looking at is there's a causal link between people who are politically engaged and the socioeconomic status. If you do not have your needs met, why the hell are you going to go try and fight for somebody else? And so I think when it comes to particularly black people, are they housed? Are they sheltered? Do they have enough extra money to go buy some food tonight? Not going to the grocery store, not going to Aldi's, but going to a nice restaurant and treating yourself. When I've canvassed all over the city, I recognize if there is a place that has a garden in the front yard, they have a higher chance of opening the door and say that they're voting, because that garden represents they have free time and they have disposable income. So if we do not have black people with free time and disposable income, how can we expect them to have the capacity to learn about a situation that they do not think is relevant because they are dying under a white supremacist society? And so I think that one was easier, I think. We had 3 more hands? 4? Okay, now it's just 1. Yeah. And I think like what Todd Nahesi coach said about like in the message, he's like, not only how can you share your story, but how can you get other people to share their stories? So I think that second part is really key, because sometimes we center ourselves when we center our perspectives of the story, but for them to self-actualize, I think their perspective of the story is necessary to be vocalized as well. We had a problem with promo. We had a pretty big problem with promo where there was anti-blackness in there. There was consistent black people not getting hired in the organization. There was, and then Luca and I and Beth and a whole bunch of other people called, like, what the fuck are we gonna do? Right? Like, there's anti-blackness in this biggest queer lobbying organization in the state, and black people don't want to work with you, right? Forget the Zionism, forget all the other things. Like, right now, there's no black people in organization. You're complicit in, like, anti-blackness. The black people that do come into your organization don't feel like they're included. So what do? We called them. We kept calling them and say, we need to have a situation, and if you don't, we don't want to work with you, right? Until you change your ways. And they did this whole entire campaign change. They did a whole bunch of, like, internal research. They ensured they hired new people. And so I think public accountability, and not a lot of people like Freud, but I think that Freud's superego concept of external ethical standards, right? Something outside, like a father, our mother, our government, our community, that says, if I act this particular way, there will be repercussions, and these negative repercussions are going to make me avoid those behaviors. So if we vocally say, if you are not this, you are not with us, and being with us is something that you want. We are the community. And so ensuring that there are lines that they can't cross, or that they have to cross, or else there'll be repercussions. I feel like those are some of the ways that we can make things move forward. But I think that needs solidarity, right? I think the organizations like HRC isn't going to change anything until its funders change. And the funders of HRC and Promo and a lot of these places are white men with disposable income. So either we get black people with disposable income to have the ability to donate to these organizations, we start our own organizations, or we convince the people who have disposable income to stop supporting places unless they're intersectional in their things. I think those are the ways that we do. We have to leverage the power brokers, either the community or the financial market, and to ensure that the organizations cannot work unless they're in line with our values. I think. I don't know. Any more questions? Did you have one? Yeah, we have a lot of people in high positions of power that are afraid to take stances because they're afraid to get funding. We saw that the mayor took a whole bunch of steps back on DEI so that she can get funding from the white supremacist orange man in power. Don't do that. I think that for people, blackness is easier than sometimes queerness because our oppression is more documented, right? It's hard. Blackness is more visible. Queerness isn't always visible. Queerness, and the thing about queerness is some people choose to be queer. Some people just say, I do not want to be a part of patriarchy. I want to have lesbian sex because fuck men, right? And they should be validated. They should be empowered, and I support them fully. I'll take all the extra men. But I think that within organizations, I think to get the needle moving is an email. I think it's to say, hey, this is this. Once you document it, people have something that they have to do, right? You can't really create. The Civil Rights Enforcement Agency of the City of St. Louis it just got a new executive director, and they're just now taking more applications. So if it got to the point where you need to file a complaint, that could be something. Additionally, you can say, hey, I have a friend, and they do queer advocacy training for nonprofits or businesses or whatever you do. They would be a perfect fit for our DEI training. Initiating that conversation and being annoying. Lobbyists are annoying. You think that we're plaguing the earth from all these oil tycoons because they're just like, well, I guess I will just let them respond. No, they keep calling people and say, we want you to kill the earth. We want you to kill the earth. So you need to have that same energy as a big oil tycoon, show up into that room and fight for trans people and say, do that and just make it documented. Because once you document something, then it's documenting that they're ignoring it. So get them. Any more questions? I don't know what time it is. Oh, I got 5 more minutes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. Wow, that's a lot of things, right? Like, what do you want to raise awareness for? Accomplice? Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. I think, how can you promote what's going on with queer liberation within WashU's like institution, or you as an individual outside of it? Okay. I think that there's like, we see the Grove, right? We see like drag shows, and I think that there are other places like Poetry and Rage or Goody House, or places where queer people are congregating. And like, how can you support them? Because it's that disposable income that helps them be able to continue that craft. So I think uplifting the artists and the spaces, because the events that I throw a lot of events, they're all politically charged. Like last week, I threw an event called Snacks. It's how can we take environmentalism and queerness and combine them together and have queer eco-justice. And so there are these spaces that are happening that I guess maybe they are underground. Sometimes intentional by design. I would say go to a ball. Have you been to a ball? Okay, step 1. Yeah, the TENS Experience has a ball at Handlebar. I would follow the TENS Experience online. They're really great. They have balls all the time. They just had one at the Fox, which was pretty crazy that they had black queer experience voguing at the Fox, where black people weren't allowed to go previously. And so I would say go to a ball. I would just get into that culture, right? I know WashU's. Yeah. They're interesting. Off the record, I will have that conversation. And I know, because I'm part of the team working on it. The WashU is working on an Engaged City thing where they're doing cultural assets and they're mapping cultural assets in the city of St. Louis and where things are happening. And I think that could be a really great project to not just tap into, but like steal all the data. Also, Thomas Dunn Learning Center. I don't know if you know about them. They would be a great partner. I feel like I just need to have one-on-ones with everyone. It's like, hey, let's. I'm out of time. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Now I'm going to smoke some weed.